Controversial indeed. So what sorts of action plans or lessons have we learned from the Chilcot report 1 year later? And is Iraq's instability today a direct result of the 2003 invasion? Lots to talk about. Let's bring in Mark Kagan. He's a former U.S. Department of Defense intelligence analyst and the current president of Panoptis Intelligence, a Washington-based consulting company. Mark, welcome to the program. Before we talk about the Chilcot report, I want to ask you about Mosul. This operation to retake the city from ISIL has been going on for 8 months now. Iraqi troops are on the verge of capturing the entire city. Talk to me about the strategic and symbolic significance of this, because this is Iraq's second largest city.
Yes, precisely. Second largest city in a major and significant area of Iraq, and you could say the second capital of ISIS. Strategically, militarily, psychologically, ideologically, religiously, it's a major blow to ISIS and a major accomplishment by the coalition forces and by the Iraqi government. However, even when they declare victory, it's not going to be a final victory.
And that was my next question.
Right.
Talk about the challenges with street after street, neighborhood after neighborhood destroyed, homes wiped out, families having to withdraw, flee the city, so many civilian casualties. Where do you even begin?
That's going to be a major problem both for the coalition and especially for the Iraqi government, because they have to set priorities. And one rule of thumb that I go by is when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And they have to avoid falling into that trap because there are so many problems. And really, when you're talking about Mosul as a city, it's been largely destroyed, both in terms of infrastructure and in terms of the population fleeing or being killed. So they've got to get their priorities straight. They also have to realize that, and put aside the propaganda value of it, that they haven't really captured the city, because other areas that are supposedly under full Iraqi control, there are still remnants of ISIS in the population who are still pulling off raids and attacks and suicide bombings. And that's going to go on, especially because you have a much, much bigger area in Mosul, and there are much more areas that they can hide in. So it's not really over.
Right. And so how do you even make sure groups, terrorist, brutal organizations like ISIS or ISIL, how do you make sure they don't regroup again, fighters within the organization, and we're not going to have this problem occurring in other parts of the world?
Well, unfortunately, my prognosis is not very optimistic as far as that's concerned, because the area has been going through so much instability and chaos, and ISIS control actually for parts of the population were bringing in stability and governance in their own way, an extremely brutal and bloody governance and stability, but stability nonetheless. And that's one of the reasons why they got so much traction initially, because the Iraqi government was so dysfunctional and so corrupt that the people initially, or many of the people initially, greeted ISIS as, you might say, liberators, plus the fact that since that's a primarily Sunni region, they were feeling a great deal of resentment at the central government, which was basically a Shiite government that was in many ways allied with Iran, and they saw that as the enemies.
Let me go to the Chilcot report now. As we saw in Richard Bestick's piece, Britain's spy chiefs really warned Tony Blair weeks before the invasion the risks would increase of terror attacks. So how much do you believe what happened in Iraq back in 2003 with the invasion contributed to what we see today with a terror organization like ISIS?
Well, you could make the argument that the invasion itself did not lead directly to this, but it was the post-invasion situation where there was absolutely no plans of how they were going to run things, take care of things after they invaded Iraq and overthrew the Saddam Hussein government. But having done that, you could say it's like, a hornet's nest. Dangerous, hornets are flying around it, but as long as you don't poke at it, things are going to be fine. It's still dangerous, but the invasion was not just poking at it, but literally sticking a stick or beating the hornet's nest, and then all these hornets erupt all over the place and in all sorts of directions. The problem to look at now is they should take some of those lessons learned from the Chilcot report and also from reports that have been done by U.S. congressional committees at what was done right and, more importantly, what was done wrong, and then apply them in Mosul and then later in Raqqa in Syria. But the problem is you're dealing with a situation that's even more unstable, where you have competing groups, and in Syria you have a central government which is still pretty much central in the capital Damascus. You have the Russians who have their own interests, and you have the Iranians
in the kitchen at the moment.
Yes.
All right, Mark Kagan, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, sir. We certainly appreciate